Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more of Ideologies. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Mr. Karl Marx. This is the Communist Manifesto. We are in section 2, Proletarians and Communists. We're going to dig through this and discuss. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various ideas and whether or not they have any basis in reality. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if you get lost in the weeds at any point in time, there are resources linked up here with a lot of time that you can go back and find out exactly what I mean. Most of the definitions are contained at the beginning of the playlist. So, with that being said, we are going to dive in and see what's up with the proletarians and communists. In what relation did the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interest, separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles by their own which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. Now, it is important to note here, we read through the other section, it is linked up here, but the proletarians are a movable people, right? It starts off as being this person, but it quickly adjusts as more and more people need to have their things taken from them. So when it says the proletariat as a whole, that is not a definition. It is not. Because in the last section, we saw that they changed what proletariat means. It went from meaning the wealthy bourgeoisie, the landholder elite, and then it slowly worked itself down to any shop holder or any farmer, right? So it didn't necessarily encompass all the working people. It didn't necessarily encompass all of any one particular group. It is an adjustable nominatory that you can put on just whoever you want. I can say that I am the proletariat, and so it is for me. But you can say that I am not the proletariat, so it is not for me. It is a key fundamental into why communism does not work, is that it is an ever expanding victimhood mentality. And the more people that you take things from, the more people there will be to take things from, because you will work it down until they get to you, and then you'll be mad when they're taking it from you. Communism is about taking from other people the things which are theirs. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the differing countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat. You can't do that. Independent of all nationality. That is simply untrue. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interest of the movement as a whole. And again, not definitive. It is me, and whoever I decide is the proletariat, that's who it is, and that's who I represent as a whole. And if you once were a part of it and now you are not, it's still a whole, even though they have wholly removed you from the situation. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communist is the same as that of all the other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based upon ideas or principles. That's true. Even without this next part, that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer, including yourself. Including yourself. It is not based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle. That's not true. From a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change, consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of the bourgeois property. How did that work out for them? How did that work out for the French? Do you know? Do you know how bad the famines were? You probably did. You didn't care, right? Just like you wouldn't care just how bad the famines got in Russia and Ukraine, or how bad the famines got in China or North Korea. Like, you literally don't care, right? You would be the ruling class, so you didn't care. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property, or property that people own. The modern bourgeois property system is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, or on the exploitation of the many by the few. And in one sense, right, I am going to grant him, right, serfdom, involuntary servitude. What happened in Ireland, right? There was never a famine in Ireland. They were starved to death. Intentionally, on purpose, by people taking the things that were theirs and appropriating them for someone else, which is the basis of communism, right? We're going to take these things from you and we're going to distribute them to the people we decide are worthy. The problem is that most of the time when you redistribute it, people have no idea what to do with the thing they redistribute. That's why we have a homeless problem. There are assistance programs for people who are homeless. Did you know that? They are not the easiest thing to get into, but they are there. Most of the homeless in this country are homeless by choice because they believe stupid shit like this, right? There should be no property is dumb. That someone who owns property is automatically against someone who isn't is dumb. Taking someone else's property to reassign it to someone else is never going to work correctly. Never, ever, 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 ever. The class antagonisms, however, was a real thing, right? We did have landed nobles who in turn were lording over their peoples, and that is true, and that was pretty terrible, right? Serfs didn't own their property. They rented it from the people who owned the property, the landed nobility. And so they were a step above the unhoused and the involuntary servitude, but they didn't get to own their own things. It was someone else's property. And so the abolition of that system is okay, right? That was an excessively oppressive. There was no free market economy that was completely controlled by the government. There was no deciding that you wanted to change your life path. That was decided by the government. You did not get to determine your own path. And that was the problem. It wasn't that these people had the land. It was that people were investing their entire livelihoods into other people and their land with no recourse, right? There was no way that you were ever going to work and become free. And you might be able to request of this master to move over there, but it probably would not happen. They wanted you working their fields. You would have to have a very good reason to leave. You had to have permission to marry, right? You had to have permission to do anything. And so that classism, that's fine. I am perfectly fine with that disappearing. This other classism doesn't work. Now, granted, this was right when the nobility idea was dying off. This was right around the time of the French Revolution. This was right around the time of the Spanish Revolution and the American Civil War, right? All of these things was great change happening, and some of it was necessary. Slavery is fucking abominable. I hate that it was ever a thing, but it was the history of humanity up until the end of the American Civil Revolution. Getting rid of those class problems is not a problem. That is the artificial separation of you from success. Your success being entirely dependent on someone else. But today, right now, in the United States of America, that does not exist. There are people with an extraordinary amount of wealth, and personally, I don't like almost any of them. I find them all to be pretty reprehensible. Absolutely shit human beings. But they worked. They got what they got through working. I don't have a problem with that. They are not artificially separating you from success. You have the ability to succeed in this country. If nowhere else on the planet, you can go and completely change your life in 6 months. Too many people do it for you to say it's not possible. Okay, you're stuck in a ghetto, right? You're stuck in the poor parts of town. You're stuck with depression or addiction or whatever. Well, then you have to make your choices, right? Are you going to continue to use? That's a choice. Are you going to stay in your city? That's a choice. Are you going to stay in whatever field of work you're in currently? That's a choice. But you get to choose to change. That doesn't happen in communism. If you are not happy with your job in communism, too bad. They're not going to let you just change. They're not going to let you try a new career. They're going to insist upon you staying where they assigned you. You don't get to choose to be a farmer. Somebody chooses for you to go to the farm. And if you don't work hard enough on the farm, they invest some lead in you. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. And it is upon this point that I die, right? This is the point where we have people trying to roll this out today. We have people saying that they are going to price fix, and they are running for president of the United States as absolutely unqualified as they may happen to be. We have somebody saying that they are going to enact price and rent controls. That is taking away your private property. It's a small piece, and you may not even have private property, but you do. You have private property. You have a phone. You have whatever you're watching this on. You have wherever you happen to be living. If you're renting, it is still in a form of private property, right? You are protected from search and seizure in that domicile. Does it belong to you? No. But you know what? You can change that. You can save money and you can buy a house or land, and nobody has to tell you you can't. If this goes into effect, you will never have that right again. Your children won't, your grandchildren won't. The abolition of private property is the grossest form of artificial slavery that is possible. That is returning you to the exact same conditions of the slave laborer. Right? This was just before the end of slavery here in the United States, right before the Civil War kicked off. But Karl Marx obviously paid no attention to the fact that none of those slaves had private property. Not a single one of them. It is the same. Somebody's going to have the property. Somebody is going to be in control of the property. Somebody is going to be making the decisions about the property. But it won't be you. Almost certainly. Somebody else will be in charge of that decision. It will not be you. And people get caught up in the idealism of, well, yeah, that sounds great. I can just go and use this property. Okay, what if somebody else wants to use it? Well, then you got a committee, and the committee makes the decision. And if they decide against you, so what? What do? You have no recourse. You can't go over here and buy a different property. You can't go over here and invest in a different spot. You're stuck. That's the problem with the abolition of private property. Like one of the simplest of the problems that only takes a surface level of inquiry to understand is completely terrible. Like completely and fundamentally terrible. We, communists, have been reproached with a desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be, on the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. It is. Hard won, self acquired, self earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and of the small peasant? A form of property that proceeded from the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is destroying it daily. Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Yes. Not a bit. It creates capital. An example, that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not a person, it is not a personal, it is a social power. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. That is stupid. That is stupid. That is demonstrably false. Yes, capital is involved. But, as we discussed before, money is merely an exchange of time. Now, you may not like where your exchange of time rate lies, and if so, you can change that. But money is only the exchange of time. It is, I will do this for this amount of time, and you will value that time at X amount. And then I can take that X amount and go buy someone else's time. Instead of a direct barter, it is allowing you not to have to carry around a whole fucking cow in order to get a goat. Instead, you can sell your goat to someone who needs a goat or a cow. Right? That's what my example was. Your cow, their goat. So you can take your cow, which the goat guy may not need, and sell it to somebody who needs the cow. And then you can take the money that you get from the cow, or the gold, or the diamonds, or the pearls, or the wampum, or the salt, or whatever the currency is, and you can exchange that to the person that owns the goat that you want instead of the cow for their time and their effort and their things, so that you can have the goat. That is the basis of the money, right? Instead of having to carry a cow, you can carry $1 bill or $100 bill and use that instead of the cow. You don't have to carry around 15 pounds of butter to all of your neighbors to get eggs from this one and corn from this one and peas from that one. You don't have to go through and carry the big bulky thing. Instead, we as society have decided that we're going to use this other exchange of currency. In communism, you don't have that exchange of currency. You don't get to value your time. Everybody else gets to decide what your time is worth. So to argue that capital is not personal is dumb. It is talking about grand scale capital, okay? Let's talk about that. You and your 4 best friends, the people that you spend all of your time with, you all decide, you know what? We want to start a business. And so you pool your money to buy that business. You invest your own time, your own money, your own capital into that business. And it's all five of you, and you're all working. So you're all sharing the risk, you're all sharing the reward. But it gets to the point where the five of you can no longer manage the business. It is doing great. You're making capital. People have invested their time to buy your time. And now you can invest in that money, that time that someone else invested in you, into someone else so that they can work and you can go and do other things with your time. That is your ability to exchange your capital for someone else's time. That is a personal decision. The five of you come together to make the decision to hire one person, but that is still investing, right? That is still capital on a personal level, deciding to use that capital. Now we get into the arguments about Microsoft and Amazon. Is there exploitation? Yeah, probably so. But everybody that works for them in this country, not talking about elsewhere, but in this country, the United States of America, is doing so voluntarily. They have decided that their time is worth this amount of money. And you accepted the job that paid that. You had the choice to not to. You have the choice. I do not agree with Jeff Bezos as a human being. I think that he's pretty detestable. All of his actions are aligned opposite of what humanity should be aligned with. I don't know that he has any redeeming qualities. I don't. Everything I have seen from the man is terrible. But he took the time and money to invest in a delivery service that everybody said was stupid. And so the reward from that should be his. Should he invest more in his people? Absolutely. That is ethical capitalism. But he doesn't have to. You can not work for him. You can work for somebody else. You can work for a direct competitor. You can become a direct competitor. Is it tough? Absolutely. What do you need to do? Get some investors to invest in you in the same way that he did. And then you can be the example of how to do it, right? But you don't get to just talk shit. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage. An example, the quantum of the means of subsistence, which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. I say this one all the time too, right? As long as there has to be a law saying you cannot pay a human being less than this for work, it is never going to be enough. If you are on minimum wage for longer than a year or two, you are the problem, not the business. You are agreeing to abide by that price. You may not like to hear that, but it's true. You have decided that you are worth the absolute minimum in the market. Nobody else decided that for you. You did. I worked one minimum wage job my entire life, and that was in high school, delivering pizzas. Every single job after that, I made more than that. Every one of them. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We, by no means, intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. That is untrue. Again, prima facie. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. But freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted buying and selling, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. Yes, I am. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. That is untrue. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend, and I will shoot you. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, in example, from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment you say individuality vanishes. You must, therefore, confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. Not the upper class, the middle class. Remember, the target went down. This person must, indeed, be swept out of the way and made impossible. Well, if you get rid of the upper class and the lower class, then everybody is lower class. Or if you get rid of the upper and the middle, then everybody is lower. Imagine that. You must, therefore, confess, communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. Bullshit. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. Bullshit. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have, in the same way, been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Appropriating. Just as to the bourgeois the disappearance of the class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply for our intended abolition of bourgeois property. The standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc., your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property. just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, the misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you, what you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds it complemented in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes. And both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But, you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, is that not also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate? By the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education, but they do seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, become all the more disgusting as, by the actions of modern industry, all family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production, by making them instruments of production in the workforce. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women which, they pretend, is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Other bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of the proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. And I have to interrupt on this one. That is you. That is you projecting. Does it happen? Has it happened? Will it happen? Yes. Doesn't matter what the context is. People are unfaithful. Particularly when they get into power. I will not deny that at all. They get debauched. That is truth. They get bored, for lack of a better term. They get bored, and so they go and they pursue this thing, right? But it's not a system of wives in common. There's a reason they keep it under wraps, right? It is not something that is common, even. You may think so. He probably thought so. And that means that he was probably running around with some people who were doing that. I don't deny that they exist, but you can find examples of both extremes wherever. I am positive that there were people who were faithful in their marriage. They were, some of them, bourgeois. The destruction of the family unit is here outlined. Point blank. They do not want the family unit. Well, I got some news for you, Bubba. The family unit has been the basis of society since society had a basis. Since the first group of people got together, they have done so in communal families. Even when they were sharing property, they weren't sharing spouses. Getting rid of the education, that's a problem too. If you are unaware, the Department of Education in the United States of America is an abysmal failure. Like, horrible failure. And that is communistic in nature. It was taking the individual sovereignty of you to ensure your child was taught and giving it to the government, who said, we will educate all the children according to this standard. And now, 60 years later, every single measurable metric of intelligence, education, and usefulness has declined. We have less people able to functionally read as a percentage. We have less people able to do math. We have people incapable of rhetoric and logic. We have people absolutely incapable of understanding even civics, which is, when I went through school, half a year. And they don't understand it on a simple level. It's a single constitution with a few amendments. You could even put all of the Federalist Papers in the curriculum. And we don't, right? It would fit within the guidelines of the time frame that we allotted for this. And we do not extrapolate on it. That is intentional. They do not want you to understand the Constitution. That is the direct result of the Department of Education. Now, I say all the time, and you will hear me say it again, I live in Walker, Louisiana. We have an exceptional school system right here. We have schools that are teaching people things. They leave school knowing things. If you're going to college, you are equipped for college. And if you are not, you are equipped for not. You are equipped to go into the workforce and get the very best value for your time, if you are willing to put in the work. It has nothing to do with the Department of Education, right? It does, tangentially, but it is a pilot program right here that we're doing. It is an initiative that we are expanding beyond the Department of Education in this local system, and it is working extremely well. We pay extra taxes for that school system, and we're happy with it here. Down the road, they're not. Same school board, same school system, same distribution of funds. All the metrics are the same, but the next town over, their schools suck. The next town that way, their schools suck. The town this way, they barely even have a school. But right here, we have taken the initiative to improve our schools beyond the communistic intentions of the Department of Education. The Department of Education, which is being advocated for here in this text, is a utter, abysmal failure. Taking away the family structure and your decision on how to raise your kids is probably one of the worst parts of communism. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system. An example of prostitution, both public and private. So they're not even going to let you sell your own groin. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationalities. The working men have no country, so reproach absolutely verified. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation. It is, so far, itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world's market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries at least is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put to an end, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. No, it won't. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of a serious examination. Yes, they are. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and in his social life? What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. Not all of them. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition with the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. There are, besides, eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality, instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, vis-a-vis the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas, which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class. to win the battle of democracy. There is a reason why we are not a democracy here in the United States. As a matter of fact, we are guaranteed a republic form of government. A democracy is mob rule. It is whatever the majority says. That is terrible. The majority is ignorant. Republic, however, says that my voice matters. I am to be represented by someone who I determine to represent me, and they are to represent me in the manner in which I want to be represented. I have the power to not be represented by that person through election, through moving, through voicing my displeasure, by running against them. All of these things. That is republicanism. Democracy says, you have this bike, and 51% of the people says, that's not your bike. And so it's not. They take your shit. That is communism. That is democracy in action. It is why we have to fight so hard against democracy. We use democratic systems. I am fully aware of that. Elected representatives is a democratic system, but it is used in a republican form of government. And so it is completely different. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by all degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, an example of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, the new bourgeoisie, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the right of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable: abolition of property in land, and application of all rents of land to public purposes. A heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. Abolition of all right to inheritance. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing of cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Equal liability of all labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. All terrible ideas. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled, by the force of circumstances, to organize itself as a class, if, by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class and, as such, sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And so ends this section, the proletariat and communists. And this last part, right? You will never get rid of classes. There will always be haves and have-nots, and it is outlined in the text we just read. The new ruling class. Do you think they're going to go away? Do you think they're going to give up power? No. As a matter of fact, pretty much the only system where people actually give up power, it's this one, the one that we are in, the elected republic, right? Our Constitution guarantees a transfer of power, a peaceful transfer of power according to the will of the people, as represented through the republic. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say something that I don't normally say, and may even wind up with a strike from YouTube, but I'm going to tell you in no uncertain terms, because we are in a very uncertain time. There are people advocating heavily for this system to be rolled out. We have a current presidential candidate who is, in part and mostly in total, advocating directly for this. It's not just the wanting to put price caps, right? But she's talking about rent controls. She's talking about grocery store controls. And I'm talking about Kamala Harris, right? Miss Willie Brown's penis sharpener. She has determined that the government can set the prices. And we have an election coming up. I personally cannot allow communism to roll out. I can't do it. I have to die. It does come down to that. I will endeavor to take as many people with me as I possibly can who are trying to directly enact communism. I am not threatening a presidential candidate by any means. I am fully convinced that if it comes down to it, I will be one of the first one to die. I am a cripple, right? I am better now than I was 6 months ago, better than I was 3 years ago for sure. But I can't run, right? I can't even charge. I can merely walk at a fairly brisk pace into whatever is coming at me. I'm not going to hide from it. I'm going boldly into the face of whatever. I'm fully invested in this country going in the correct way. I did a whole playlist where we talked about the Federalist Papers, which nobody is ever going to watch. I read through the Declaration of Independence, which nobody is ever going to watch. I read through all of the amendments of the Constitution and the entire body of the Constitution, which nobody is ever going to watch. Because I am energetically investing in those things. I'm reading through this because I am energetically investing in the antithesis of this. I am firmly standing against communism in every single form, including many in which we are currently involved. All right, regulations are great. Trade unions, do your thing. Collective bargaining is amazing. 40-hour work week, beautiful. No child labor, I am on board. No personal property, you're going to have to kill me. You're going to have to kill me. When you start rolling out price controls, that is the key to go to war, people. I hate that. I do not want that. I am praying and investing all of my energy against that every single day. But I'm going to tell you, my kids will not see this roll out while I still breathe. It will not happen. And it is that simple. I'm not advocating violence at all. I know where I stand, and I don't ask anybody else to stand with me on this. You don't have to. You know where you stand. You have to make an individual choice for your individual self. I never advocate for violence. You can go back through my videos. You can see thousands of times where I tell you that God loves everybody. God wants us all here. But you cannot tolerate a bully. If you do, then you have bullies. You cannot tolerate a tyrant, because if you do, you breed tyrants. You cannot tolerate communism, because if you do, you breed despots. Communism has failed every time. It has no success stories. None. Ever. In the history of ever. People have, at points in time, been communal. They lived in communal systems. Right? The tribes of North America, some of them, were examples of that. Free exchange of goods and services by the tribes was a thing, but so was wampum. They traded rocks, they traded shells, they traded beads, they traded things. That is capitalism. It doesn't have to have money. There were ruling classes, separated from England, separated from Europe, separated from Asia, separated from the entirety of across the pond. Here, they had ruling classes. Here, over here, completely separate from the rest of the entirety of history. There was oppression. Here, there was. It's not something artificially placed upon. It is human nature to organize ourselves in this manner. Communism is anti-nature. It is, by its very features, destined to fail. You take away all reason to excel. If you have no intellectual property, which it tells you in here you don't, then you can't write a book and get rewarded for that book. Nobody's going to let you write a book. It takes months, at least, to write a good novel. I've done a book. I don't sell it. Like, it's still up for sale, but I don't promote it. It wasn't great. Even that took months. Nobody is going to pay for you to sit at home for months to write a book. Nobody is going to pay for you to sit at home to learn how. Nobody's going to pay for you to learn how to make a painting or compose music. Nobody's going to pay for you to sit at home and learn the things of beauty. It's not going to happen. You have to take that upon yourself. You have to have the initiative. And the initiative almost always has a financial backing. You may enjoy the fuck out of painting, but you want to sell that painting. You at least want to give it away to someone so that they find value in it. Trying to extricate the value system from value is the reason why it's going to fail. You cannot do away with the exchange of value. It will never work unless we are in a utopian society where we can literally pull something from nothing. Right? If we have the replicators from Star Trek, then maybe we could do communism. But you would still be taking the work of somebody, and they are not compensated the same. Captain Kirk is not the same as the engineer. It's just not. It's two different levels. It's two different classes. And that was, at best, socialism, but most likely communism. That was utopian form of communism, right? You didn't get paid. Yeah, they had their currency, but they never used it, right? You go to the replicator and get what you want. Short of that situation, we can never do this. We can't get rid of what my time is worth, because I'm not going to agree with what you think. And if I want to write a book, I can. I can take that risk upon myself. I can sit down and invest my energy into that. And I can take that book and I can return my energy in the form of money. But if you have to support me learning how to write a book, you're going to tell me to go farm. You're going to tell me, no, the value is not in that book. The value is in that corn. Go grow it. And that's where we're going to wrap this up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment, not too much confusion, and a little bit of levity to a serious fucking topic. I don't know that there is a more serious topic on the planet than this. It's why I am investing my energy into the negative. I normally don't do that, but this is important. This system is fundamentally flawed. And if something is fundamentally flawed, it cannot stand. Any implementation of it must fail. And the failure of the implementation of this is catastrophic. It is millions of deaths at a minimum. And that is terrible. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree, if it stays respectful, it gets to stay up. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.